Yes. Yeah, I've written a novel about the modern folk world, the kind of scene that is here at the Kerrville Folk Festival called Revival. Came out in September 2011. As far as I know, it's the first novel written entirely set in the folk world of the 21st century.
Nice. And it's out. It's is it available?
Yes, yeah, yeah, it's available. It came out in September 2011. It's available at Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, any of the online sites, or you can find it at revivalnovel.com.
And the name of it's Revival Novel dot
It's
com.
called, yeah, that's the website, revivalnovel.com. The book is Revival, a folk music novel.
Great.
Now,
And
do you
and
want me looking at you or at the camera?
camera.
Okay.
Yeah. And uh, tell us where we can get it, and then like your name too, like with the book. Like
Okay.
the book is called. It's you can get it here, and my name's.
Like the different places, just say it all
Yeah.
in one bunch?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've written a novel about the folk music world. The full title is Revival, a folk music novel. Story about two songwriters set in the Cambridge, Massachusetts folk scene. It's available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. iTunes has it as an ebook. It's available in all the ebook formats. And you can also get it at revivalnovel.com or find out a little bit more about it from there.
And what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I wrote a nonfiction book. I'm a folk singer and a songwriter, and when I moved to Boston in the mid '80s, I became the folk music writer for the Boston Globe for about 20 years. And my first book is a nonfiction book called Deep Community Adventures in the Modern Folk Underground that creates kind of a portrait of the folk world as it exists today in festivals like the Kerrville Folk Festival and little coffee houses and house concerts, et cetera, et cetera. And that just made me think that there are some truths you need fiction to tell. There are some things about what it's like to live in a world that you may not be familiar with that I couldn't really say through nonfiction. What it feels like to be a folk musician in the 21st century, what it feels like to write a song, what it feels like to be at a festival like the Kerrville Folk Festival, and to live in a world that's inhabited so much by the energy, that really rare and wonderful energy that volunteers bring to it.
That's rich, man. That's really good.
Thanks.
Uh, where do you see the low lying fruit for musicians, up and coming musicians of of today? Where do you see the business low lying fruit for the musicians to pick, or uh, where is this going? This music business?
What do you mean the music business overall, like the commercial music business or the folk world?
I guess the folk world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the folk world exists very separately from the music industry today. After the '60s folk revival, I think a lot of people, picked themselves up and dusted themselves off and said, our mistake was ever thinking that the commercial music industry is going to take care of a music form like this in the long haul and is going to take care of it. So folk music, very much at festivals like Kerrville, it rebuilt itself as as a form that could exist outside the mainstream. And I think one of the things that keeps folk music very healthy is that Utah Phillips, the great folk singer and raconteur, used to say there are no career moves in folk music. And I think what he meant was there are only fans. Your ability to find them, your ability to keep them, and that's how you build a career. The only star makers in the folk world are the fans. And so the low-hanging fruit in the folk world is just getting on every stage you can, getting in front of an audience, learning how to turn your show into a conversation that the audience is going to want to continue to have with you. And so you have a lot of people making not big skyrocket fame and fortune careers, but really good middle class, upper middle class incomes, but over a 20, 30, 40-year period. There are going to be people performing here at Kerrville this weekend that performed at the very first Kerrvilles and have been making a living playing folk music ever since. So it's more of a community music, it's more of a lifetime music. It's more of a real people's music, and I think it's in great shape.
Really good stuff to sink your teeth
you.
into, right?
Thank you.
Can you tell us the difference between commercial music and folk music?
Well, in a lot of ways, they're similar. In that, this is a commercial festival. People buy tickets. The performers are getting paid. There's a stage and microphones. But I think folk music, its ancient roots. It was a community music. It was the self-made soundtrack of the lives of ordinary people. And I think what folk music shares with that old traditional folk music is a desire to be about our real lives as we actually live them day to day. And as a result, when it connects with the commercial music mainstream, it's always very bumpy because a lot of the aesthetics that are so dear to folk music are not, the whole idea of a song that has a shelf life of 500 years is not an appealing concept to somebody who's trying to get a new hit out every 45 minutes. So in one sense, folk music very much is a branch of the commercial music tree. But I think it also has this social music component to it. Dancing and people jamming, going to bluegrass festivals and jamming, having old time jams. In my book Revival, I made the main character a guy who was a very good musician but also hosts an open mic and a jam session. And a big part of the theme of the book is showing why that's such a tremendously important thing for this music. Folk music is in good shape when the grassroots are in good shape, and when people are sharing it and playing it just for the love of the music rather than because there's some big brass ring going on. I think the things that make folk music different from commercial pop are the things that make it very healthy in the 21st century. So much of the way folk does business is being made easier by the new technologies, by Facebook and all of these free ways to spread publicity around, and all these grassroots way to take advantage of the human energy that's always been so much the driving force behind this kind of music. This kind of music also can get small and get personal in a way that it's harder for commercial pop to do. A lot of the venues around the folk circuit today are house concerts, actually concerts in people's homes, where a performer can go and make a lot of money because he makes all the money. And most folk musicians also are their own primary retailers. They sell records, so you'll find most musicians that are here selling every single album that they've ever made and continuing to make a living from those. So, I don't know where to end with that. The Kerrville Folk Festival has a very important place in the modern history of folk music. After the commercial revival of the 1960s, this music was in a lot of trouble. We had become dependent on the commercial music industry, and when the commercial music industry lost interest in folk music, people didn't know quite where to go and how to proceed. And I think the whole idea that the Kerrville Folk Festival was just created by Rod Kennedy and a crew of very dedicated people, and its role was to keep the music alive, fueled only by the love of the people who supported it, and by volunteers and by people who were in it for the love of the music rather than because it was a good marketing trend to get on top of. You knew that Rod Kennedy and the Kerrville Folk Festival were never going to give up on folk music because they decided it wasn't cool anymore. And it showed, I think its success helped show a lot of people all over the country that we can do this ourselves. We don't have to be dependent on big concert promoters and television support and commercial media support. We can spread the word ourselves. There are people who love the music and will support a festival like this. There are performers that will come and support it, and we can do this together. And that's the way folk music has really rebuilt itself over the last 40 years. And I don't think it's overstating it to say that the Kerrville Folk Festival has played a legendary role in that. Its strength, the muscle it was able to show in the early 70s and through the 80s, really encouraged people all over the country to think, you know, we love this music, I'll bet we can do this too.
That's good.
When Kerrville became really nationally prominent in the 1970s, there was a new kind of songwriter that seemed to be emerging that was very closely associated with Kerrville. Texas guys like Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt, especially Townes, who seemed to want to have the kinds of careers that were happening on a Kerrville Folk Festival stage. There was kind of an elan to performers like Townes Van Zandt and Guy Clark and Utah Phillips, Jim Ringer and Mary McCaslin. Like, they were too cool to be on a major label. They were too cool to be rich and famous. They were part of this underground outlaw music scene. And the fact, especially with Townes, the fact that major labels wanted him and that he had that kind of star-powered appeal and just was too much in love with the music because it was all about the song. He wrote a song called For the Sake of the Song, and it was all for the sake of the song. A new kind of spirit emerged through festivals like Kerrville that not only said we can do this ourselves, we can fuel this music with our own hearts and our own passions, but that there's a new kind of star emerging that wants a place where the only mission statement for the folk songwriter is to write your best song. Ellis Paul, a great Boston songwriter, said to me once, our deal isn't to be larger than life, our deal is to be life. And I really think the Kerrville Folk Festival played an important role in making that part of the modern folk scene and in showing the rest of the country that you could do it on your own terms and still be successful. It's very, very important.
Okay.
You know, people tend to think of folk as sort of a retro music and kind of a fuddy-duddy music and kind of a, not business savvy kind of music. But because folk music has had to do so much of this themselves, they've really been innovators in, for example, in the independent music market. Folk was coming out on independent labels before they were even referred to as independent labels. There was in the 1940s and 50s, there was the label Folkways that would record Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and Leadbelly and other of the great American folk singers who were blacklisted and not able to appear on commercial labels. And a tremendously important thing happened in, I think it was 1960, when Joan Baez was on the cover of Time magazine, and Columbia Records offered her the biggest contract they had ever offered anybody, ever. Bigger than what they offered Sinatra, Crosby, the biggest contract ever. And she walked away from it and instead signed with this weird little classical music label called Vanguard Records. In some part because it had recorded the Weavers at the height of the blacklist. And so all of a sudden it was Vanguard and another weird little independent label called Elektra that became the two big folk labels of the 1960s and very much charted this new course of independent music, of doing it for ourselves if the commercial industry won't do it. When you get into the 70s and 80s rebuilding it, there are festivals like this where they said, well, we know there's still people who love this music, so we're going to start a festival here in Kerrville, and the people will come and will show what a big music form this still is. In the 80s, the folk music was way ahead of the curve on the CD, on getting into CDs in the 80s and 90s, because we're always looking for ways to spread the music, to spread the wealth, to share the song. And it's another one of the reasons I think that folk music is very much a kind of a permanent and proud underground music today, but in great health and really doing well. There's this wonderful way of telling you the most embarrassing things about herself. She said, Joan said that after she got out of the meeting at Columbia, she just was so queasy about the idea of spending the next 10, 12 years of her life there with those people, that when she walked outside of the office, she actually threw up into one of the office ashtrays and stood back up and looked at her manager and said, I'm sorry, but I got to go talk to those little classical music people before I sign this contract. And her manager was just, are you crazy? This is the biggest contract Columbia's ever offered. but she's, you know, she really created a kind of a guiding human spirit from all of that, because after the 60s, when the major labels were no longer interested in folk music, it didn't seem like such a retreat to be on an independent label. You were doing what Joan Baez did. It was the true thing to do. It was the idealistic thing to do, because she was so much that kind of spirit during the 60s. And that kind of spirit, I think, still pervades the folk music world. Where the two main characters, Nathan Warren and Kit Palmer, are making a record together, and she's tightening up because it isn't a song that she's real sure of. And Nathan is the older guy, more experienced, and he's engineering the album, and he says to her, why don't you just run through it once on your own and just feel it and just really get into it. And then he pushes the red button, and she sings it like she's never sung it before. And she says afterwards, he clenching up again, should we do a take? And Nathan says, I don't think we have to. I think we got it. So, and then he thinks to himself, it's a good trick, but it only works once. An album, I did it. We just nailed it in the first take. You know, it just really was good. And the guy who was producing the album said, we've never done it better. He's also a musician. We've never done it better. You can do another one if you want, but I think we got it. So I decided just to find out. I did it again, and I really emoted. You know, I really tried to, push it and everything. And I went back in and listened to it. I couldn't tell the difference. It just wasn't there. It was, all the stuff I thought I was doing. The recorder didn't care about any of that stuff. It just cared about the sound.